Hi everybody, this is Sunny from Sunny Side Up Journals, and today I'm going to show you how I make my watercolor collage papers. These are papers that I actually create and I tear into small pieces and I add to the backgrounds of many of my journal pages. Let me show you a few of them. There's some there, some in the background there, and then let me show you on this other journal. Let's see. So here we go. So yeah, sort of in the background of some of these pages, you'll notice, oh, here are ones that I made with book pages. These background papers that are sort of like moody, a little light, a little textury, and I'm going to show you how I make them. So what I generally use are just some stamps. I have some letter stamps here. I have my corner stamp with dots, and then just sort of a, fancy little fleur-de-lis type pattern. And then today I'm also going to use some watercolor pencils. These are my Derwent Inktense pencils. And then I also use watercolor, as you see. And then I have a collection of random papers. So here's some school papers from my kids. I have some plain sulfite paper. I have vintage music, which always looks really pretty. The Flatiron, what? I also have some book pages. Some of these are like Shakespearean plays. Some are pages of a book that I don't want. And then some graph paper. All right. So what I do first is I just lay out all my papers on my workspace and just sort of try to cover my workspace entirely with the collection of papers that I have. So I'll sort of like fill in some cracks, and it's totally fine if there's overlap. In fact, it's great if there's overlap, so don't worry too much about it. Okay, so I think that's all I'm going to be able to fit. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose two colors of paint. I want to pick this purple that I love, purpley violety color, and I just start messing around. See, I'm not doing anything particularly artistic. I'm not going for any designs or any shapes or any, this is really just the most freeing, it's like finger painting for grown-ups. I'm just making marks. I'm making a mess. And again, this is just the most freeing experience because you're not going for anything in particular. You're just trying to add color to paper. That's it. And you get different values. I'm using the same blob of paint on my palette, but I get lighter shades, lighter values. I get darker values. I start using this ochre and then I change my mind. And I decide to go with my go-to, my turquoise. So I'm doing turquoise and blue, and then I will be adding gold accents. So yeah, I'm just adding color. I'm just enjoying the experience. And for me, this making watercolor papers is really not about the product. I know we say this all the time, that it's process over product. And sometimes I have to convince myself that that is the case. For this, I really, really mean it. And I truly believe it, that it's all about how much fun I'm having and how much stress relief I'm getting out of this experience of just making papers that were previously just plain and not particularly exciting, something that looked like a stack of papers that would go in the recycling, and turn them into a fun experience for me. So there's some splattering going on. I do add a lot of water. And then after I'm sort of satisfied, I do a big old mixeroo. So see how I'm sort of revealing some of the white spaces that didn't get any paint on them last time. And so I do kind of a mixeroo. I do only paint one side of it because for me, I only use this for gluing down into the backgrounds of my journals. But if you were doing something else like making actual journal pages with these, then by all means flip them over and do the reverse side too. You may need to like dry it off a little in between, but it's totally up to you. I just happen to do one side. The other thing that I want to mention here that is very important is that because because I'm making collage papers, and it could be journal papers, I really want to make sure that I'm going all the way to the edge. And when I go all the way to the edge, it's okay because there's more paper underneath because I have overlapped them intentionally. So it's totally fine if, you go over the edge and then you spill over into the next sheet. The reason why I say go all the way to the edge is because there's nothing more frustrating about using collage papers that you're trying to hand tear and use up, and the paint stops like half a centimeter, a quarter of an inch before you get to the edge of a paper, and it just looks very obviously like, oh, this is where the person stopped painting. I don't like that. I want to use every little scrap. So I make sure I go all the way to the edge. And now as I am painting, I'm seeing less and less white space, right? At first there was a lot more white space, but now I'm seeing a lot less of it because I have progressed on. And so I'm going to be moving the papers around quite a bit more, as you'll see. So I paint a little bit here. I do a big strip of purple going all the way across my workspace in a good dark value. Do a little shifteroo. Sometimes if I have too much paint, I will dab some of it with another piece of paper. Sometimes I'll shake it off, dab. Sometimes I'm blotting, sometimes I'm splattering. It's just very freeing. I do get a little bit of that navy into it, but I think it looks good because it's a similar value to or like similar tone to the turquoise. Oh, big white space. Oh, and then I found another sheet of paper. So I'm gonna definitely tackle that because for me, I like having very little white space when it comes to collage papers because my collage or my journal pages themselves tend to be very plain, and so if I'm putting down collage paper, I want them to be pretty marked up. See how I'm going all the way to the edges, getting my gold in there. And I really like this gold because it's like subtle. It's not like in your face gold, but it's definitely very, very shimmery. Now I'm moving papers around. Everybody gets a turn. This reminds me of like when I'm feeding my guinea pigs. They'll like, one of them will come up and grab a carrot, and then the other one will come up and grab a carrot, and then the next one is back. She's done with the carrot. So there's just sort of like a, I don't know, trying to make sure that everyone gets a little bit of paint time. Okay, so now my papers are dry. I did dry them off camera. And what I'm going to do now is the stamping part. So I use black ink. You don't have to get fancy and get lots of different colors of ink. I just use black ink because it's plain, it's simple, and it's accessible. And this is just like a ink pad that I had from, I don't know, like 15 years ago. And I just like squeeze more ink onto it. So it's not even any fancy sort of ink. And this is a stamp that I found at Goodwill for I think $1.99, big score. And I'm just going to overlap the pages like I did before, and I'm going to stamp. And I'm going to stamp multiple times per dip, meaning I get like a really dark print the first time, a medium print the next time, and a lighter and lighter and lighter print subsequent times. So I do a little shuffle and I do it again. And see how I am stamping at the edges? This makes it, again, really, really effective because you're going all the way to the edge of the papers and you're getting sort of like half of a print on the under paper, the paper underneath, And so you're getting like just a glimpse of that pattern, but not like a whole fleur-de-lis. And I think that makes it really much easier to use when you are using these as background papers. So I'm going to do this another time with this big stamp. I generally choose like one big stamp like this, and then I choose one that's like, I almost always choose my little corner dot one. That's the one up in the corner there. And then I use teeny tiny letter stamps. I'll show you how I use those in a minute. But see how already these papers, which just kind of looked at first like smudged up papers with purple and blue, now they look like something. They already look like something. And I like using black ink again because it does not add any more color. It just adds texture and pattern. And generally your papers that you're using, if they're like book papers or sheet music, they're probably already printed with black ink, so you're not adding like a third element. You're just adding a little bit of, I don't know, like busyness. Now I'm going in there with my favorite stamp in all the world. This is my corner dot stamp, and you probably have seen me use this in like every video. This one I did pay full price for at Paper Source, but you know, I really got my money's worth. I think I used a coupon. I really got my money's worth on this one because I use it like every day. I've used it like every day since, I don't know, for the last like 5 months. So I'm doing the same thing now with the dot stamp, and I'm not even worrying about getting every single dot on my stamp inked. It's just because it's not going to be a perfect little message or something like that. I'm not writing a word. I'm just stamping patterns. I'm getting all up in those corners, sometimes overlapping like 3 different corners and stamping their like edges. There we go. Get those edges, and like multiple stamps, multiple iterations of the same, I don't know, ink dab. I'm sure there are formal words for this, but you know what I mean, right? Yeah, I like dip into the pad and then I stamp a bunch of times on my papers. Sometimes I get like a lighter gray as a result. And so I'm playing around with tone there. Now, these are my letter stamps, and they're teeny tiny. They're little stamps. What I do, I grab a random collection of letters, and that's the key, folks, is that you grab random letters. You don't want to write a message, unless you really want to. I guess you can like stamp in the word love over and over, or like friendship or whatever. But I like to have these papers usable for whatever purpose. So I take random collection of letters, and I do actually make sure that they don't spell anything, because you don't want to accidentally spell like, I don't know, poop or something and stamp them all over your collage papers. So I just make sure that they don't spell anything or they don't look like they spell something, and I stamp them all over the place. And the effect that it has when it's not entirely legible, but you can still tell that they are letters, it makes them look more backgroundy than foregroundy. And the reason why I use these collage papers, or the purpose of these collage papers, is to provide a background for my journal pages. And so I don't want like big, bold words to pop up. Here I'm having the most fun, just dab, 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 grabbing random letter stamps and just popping them everywhere. Aren't they fun? Look at that. Here we go. We're going to do some more. Sometimes I hold multiples in one hand. Sometimes I just like grab one at a time and dab them everywhere. That said ew on it. I don't want that. I don't want EW. So I replace the letters with something else. And I'm just filling white space. You know, I'm not even aiming. I'm just dabbing in front of me like a typewriter gone a little nuts. Okay, so I'm just stamping everywhere. stamping part. Now we're going to get out the watercolor pencils, and these are Derwent Inktense, and these are actually ink pencils. Once they get wet and are activated by water, they turn into permanent ink, which is very cool. You don't have to use that kind. You can just use, like, you know, whatever kind of watercolor pencils you have, or you can just use more watercolor if you want, or any sort of water-soluble crayon, or like Stabilo Woody or something like that. I like to just take two colors that are similar to the two colors of paint that I chose before, so that I'm not adding too many additional variables. And I also selected a pencil that sort of looks like the gold paint that I selected before. Again, not adding another variable, but adding a little bit more of the accent color. So what I'm doing here is I'm just sort of scribbling little patches of color pencil onto the paper. Here I'm drawing circles, making sure, of course, that I go over the edges. And they don't have to be perfect. They're just sort of roundish, circle-ish things, little bubbles. Kind of matches the little dot stamp anyway. Making some little dots, little lines. Nothing particularly difficult or brain heavy. Just messing around, enjoying the process. And then once I've done that, I just try to find where I marked it and I follow it through with just a wet watercolor brush. And I'm going to do a little bit more here. Sometimes I even double fist it. There we go, that's better. I use the watercolor pencil with my right hand, which is my dominant hand, and then I follow up with it with a wet watercolor brush. And I just go back and forth, back and forth. It's good practice for me because my non-dominant hand is pretty pretty non-dominant. I don't use it very much when I'm doing art, but in this case, I give it a little bit of work. And see how just a little bit of that ochre, that little bit of gold, enlivens these papers. They're not just muddled because I'm taking a complementary color and adding a little bit of that ochre, that sort of goldish color as an accent. The other thing I'm doing is that I'm making sure that I go through and I find patches of paper that are still a little bit, unpainted. Like this one right here really needed some more paint, more color. So right here in this little corner and this center section, just adding more paint, covering as much white space as I can, sometimes adding patterns, sometimes adding just blobs. Oh, I'm gonna put that away. Okay. All right, now we are ready for the final stage, which is just one last pass with watercolors. So again, just covering white space, back to the same colors that I used. Try not to introduce any new colors at this point, because I have a lot of collage papers where I've added like every color that I like, big old smorgasbord, and I don't use them because they're just so busy and they don't go with anything. But these papers will look really nice on a cool or like a jewel toned spread. And I have ones that are in like Christmas colors. I have ones that are in like reds and pinks. I have ones that are in green and purple. Those always turn out really pretty. So I'm just adding more interest here. I'm doing a lot more splattering. And the great thing about splattering with watercolor is that you can just wipe them off with a wet towel off your dinner table, which is where I am doing this work. A little bit of paint here. All the way to the corners. Take my own advice. There we go. So pretty. just adding the last little finishing touches, and then I'm actually going to go dry these with my heat gun. Normally when I'm working on this on my own, I'll just leave them and I'll let them air dry, but for you all, I'm going to go and heat dry these, and then I'll show you the final product. Okay, so look how pretty they are. These are the 2 sheets of sulfite paper that I had. These are plain 9x12s. Look how gorgeous. And all I'll need to do is just tear off little corners of it, little pieces of it, and glue them down in my journal. And these are papers that my kids brought home from school. Would have ended up in the recycling, but look at them now. Look at their second life. So pretty. And now, these are the ones I really love. These are book pages. This is an old Shakespeare play. Pages out of it that I tore out. They look beautiful on that sort of vintagey yellowed paper. Oh, so gorgeous. And then these are from a book that someone gave me. These are, what is this? Graph paper. Fun. And then these are my absolute favorites. Look at the vintage music. I love how the little notes and the little dot stamp kind of look very similar, right? So they already have little dots on them, and I added more dots. And they're crunchy and gorgeous, and the way that they pick up paper or pick up paint is so pretty. And that's the flat iron one. So let me spread these out for you so you can see what they all look like. They're just so pretty. Let me see if I can organize them a little better. There we go. Okay. And basically what I've done is I've rescued all of these papers that probably would not have had a second life, and I will now, they will live in my journals. They will live forever and ever in my journals, and they are so precious to me. I hope you enjoyed watching this process. Let me know if you try it and see how you like it. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.